The Panthers brought in two veteran safeties on Monday for a visit. How could signing one of those veterans impact their draft plans at safety? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter or at me over on Blue Sky to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. And on today's episode, let's talk about safety, as Panthers brought in two veteran safeties for a visit on Monday. And let's talk about how signing one of those two could impact the Panthers' plans at safety heading into the draft in, well, less than a month's time now, as yesterday we were 1 month away from the start of the 2025 NFL draft up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But talking about the two vets that came in for visits on Monday, Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network first coming out and saying that free agent safety Julian Blackmon is on a free agent visit to the Panthers. According to his sources, just 26, Blackmon has been a starter with the Colts for the last 5 years. Carolina is still looking to add on defense, with Blackmon being the latest they're taking a look at. Then later on, Mike Kay, the Charlotte Observer, friend of the pod, came out and said, along with Blackmon, former Saints and Ravens safety Marcus Williams is also visiting the Panthers today, per league source. So Julian Blackmon, former Indianapolis Colt, and Marcus Williams, former New Orleans Saint, and most recently Baltimore Raven, are the two guys that came in on Monday, as Carolina, according to Rappaport, are still looking to add on defense. And this actually does make sense if we go back to the conversation we did have with Mike prior to free agency, that Carolina would be looking at two different safeties, that being Trevon Moehrig, who they ended up signing, and then Jevon Holland, and also said that it wouldn't be crazy if they ended up signing both of them. And also talk about they would want to draft a safety as well. So the Panthers were looking to double dip, and they got Trevon Moehrig signed up pretty early there on that legal negotiating period. At least they had agreed to terms with him. He could not officially sign until Wednesday, but you understand what I'm saying. They had agreed to terms with Trevon Moehrig pretty early on that Monday, and Jevon Holland was still available, I think, all the way till Tuesday morning for one of the guys who was the top safeties among this free agency class that we just had, or we're having currently. So Carolina thought maybe they could circle back and get him, but Holland signed for a pretty good deal. I believe he ended up going to, I don't remember, the Giants, somewhere up north. But either way, Jevon Holland, maybe New England, whatever, it does not matter. But Jevon Holland, he's off the market. But there was some talk that even after Carolina had brought in Moehrig, that maybe they would try to double dip and go get him. And you looked at it, okay, you got Trevon Moehrig. He's going to come and immediately start. Damani Richardson took over as a starter late last year. And after that, Jordan Fuller, he was leaving town. He's now down in Atlanta with the Falcons. Nick Scott, he was going to leave town, but now he's back as a guy who's going to be in a special teams role and not be considered one of those three primary starting safeties like last year in this defense. And that never really came to fruition because of the injuries that they had at the safety position to everyone except for Xavier Woods. But still, he's not going to be in that kind of role again this upcoming season. Stan Franklin Jr. is leaving. Lonnie Johnson, he's out of Carolina. They had to add Xavier Woods off, so he's gone. So Carolina needed to try and figure out more than just one veteran. Maybe they need to add two veterans. And of course, they would want to add somebody in the draft to rebuild that position group in their secondary. So this is not crazy that they're out there wanting to talk to some vets and possibly bring one more in. And at this point in time in free agency, you would think, like, we're 2 weeks removed from the beginning of the legal negotiating period. This is like the third wave, fourth wave. Things have gotten real quiet. And by the time we got to Friday of that first week, literally the actual third day of free agency, there was not much news to talk about. We got to last week and we were trying to stretch it here on the show and discuss what had been going on when, ain't really anything going on, and we're ready to move on to the draft, which we're still doing on today's show and for the next month until we actually get up to Green Bay. But still, this is not a point in time where you're going to really be getting a lot of money. So I'm thinking that if they do sign Blackmon or they sign Marcus Williams, that should not preclude them from wanting to go out there and still draft a safety to be maybe more of a long-term option. But the Blackmon one is interesting considering he is only 26. He's going to be 27 this upcoming season. And he is a name that we discussed when talking about safeties. We were more focused on Trevon Moehrig and Javon Holland, but Blackmon was a name that came up, and Mike even pointed out in his latest mailbag over on the Observer that he felt like Blackmon would be a good pairing to Moehrig, and that would question what's going to be the role as far as Damani Richardson here in Carolina this upcoming season. He would still, I think, would have a role, but maybe not as big of a role as you would think, just based off of how Jero Vero has deployed his safeties over the last couple of years as a DC in Denver here in Carolina as well. We'll talk about that later on. But looking at Blackmon last year, his PFF grade was 69.3. That was 30th out of 98 qualifying safeties in the NFL last season. Had a coverage grade of 73.5. That was 19th out of 96 qualifying safeties. And going over to Spot Track, the place for contracts, they have his market value at 3 years, $24 million. And we have seen that the market values, they're not necessarily what ends up being what the player gets. Look at what they were saying J.C. Horn's market value was, 19 mil, and what he got, 25 mil per year. And this may not be it, but it may actually be lesser considering where we're at and what the team cap space is at this point in time. Over the cap saying Carolina has $17.6 million of cap space, and got to understand they're going to need about 6, maybe 8 million to sign their draft class, and they want to have some more left over for some in-season moves. Maybe they wait till training camp to add another veteran player. We've seen that happen over the last couple of years. Need to have space for that. So I don't know if they can really give him any sort of big deal. And of course, you can push it to next year, which they've done for the most part with the deals that they've signed this off season. And it's nice that a lot of them are long-term deals, as far as not long-term, but 2-year, 3-year deals. And the way they're structured, these guys are going to be here in 2025 and in 2026. So it's going to be a 2-year proposition at the very least for a lot of the defensive talent that they brought in this off season. And that next year, they're not going to really be probably big spenders when looking at free agency, hopefully on both sides of the ball, depending upon what their needs are going to be. But Blackmon signed last year a 1-year, $3.7 million contract up in Indianapolis, and he may be looking at the same. There's a ton of incentives in that deal. It may be another prove-it deal if he comes to Carolina, and I'm sure that's the conversation that they had on Monday throughout the day, whether they could find the kind of contract that makes sense for the two of them. But I would think that it'd be more team-friendly than necessarily player-friendly if he comes to Carolina or really wherever he ends up. Now, looking at Marcus Williams, the former Saint and Raven, his PFF grade last year left a lot to be desired, 42.9. That was 97th out of 98 qualifying safeties, worse than Nick Scott, worse than Jordan Fuller, worse than Xavier Woods, the 3 guys that have all departed Carolina, with Scott, of course, coming back. The 3 guys that were going to be free agents, that were free agents, one of them, of course, Scott coming back, worse than those guys, worse than Richardson as well. So he was worse than every single safety on the Panthers roster a year ago, and safety was certainly a problem spot for Carolina. Coverage grade, 37.3, 94th out of 96. So compare that to Blackmon, 69.3 versus 42.9, 73.5 coverage grade compared to 37.3. Blackmon was a significantly better player last year in Indianapolis for the Colts than Williams was in his role in Baltimore. And I would think for Carolina, yes, it's nice to be able to have a veteran presence, but they just did this where they brought in a guy who was literally the worst safety in 2023 and Nick Scott. And well, he literally was bad again in Carolina, and now he's back in a reduced role as a special teams ace. I don't want that to be the case again. Blackmon would be my choice, very obviously, when looking at these two. And my hope is that Carolina gets that done. Now, if they do that, what impact could that have on them signing, or not just signing, but drafting rather, a safety coming up later on next month in April? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year. Told you about the Drake Bulldogs, and looking at the bracket right now, I guess Arkansas, coached by John Calipari, is the only underdog left as they are a 10 seed. But coming from the SEC, who has 7 teams in the Sweet 16, they don't really feel like an underdog or a Cinderella. And FanDuel makes it easy to back Arkansas and all the other underdogs and, well, teams that are favorites with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day back on Thursdays, tournament starting up. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. You get paid instantly. We get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on a college hoops action all tournament long. Back here on Locked On Panthers, what if the Carolina Panthers go out there and sign a veteran safety over the next couple of days? How would that impact their plans looking ahead to the draft and whether they would want to draft another safety? Going back to our conversation with Mike Kay, one of the beat reporters from the Charlotte Observer, he talked about Carolina was going to absolutely sign a safety. Possibly they would double dip and get 2 safeties. And they got Trevon Moehrig. They looked at Javon Holland. That did not work out. And now they're looking at Julian Blackmon and Marcus Williams. And possibly by the time that you listen to this or watch this show, maybe they have signed one of them. If they have signed one, hopefully it's Julian Blackmon. But we talked about that possibly happening where they could double dip. But certainly they would also, according to Mike, look ahead to the draft and want to draft one there as a long-term option as well. We talked about this on the Monday show, looking back at last year. No one had, at least I didn't have, and I don't imagine y'all had, and I get questions from you every single day at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council, and also at me on Blue Sky to get those questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag, by the way. But I get questions from you every day, and I do not recall very many people last draft cycle saying, should the Carolina Panthers draft a running back? Should the Panthers go out there and draft a linebacker in a second and third round? No one was asking for that. We were talking about getting a wide receiver. We're talking about going out there and getting a center. We weren't talking about a running back and a linebacker. That wasn't a conversation that we were having on the show last year, but you have to look at what they did by deciding on day 2 to put that capital into those positions. And you can't overlook that potentially they may want to do that again at safety. And we'll talk about what options there could be at safety, but signing another safety like a Julian Blackmon would not, in my opinion, preclude them from wanting to go out there and to draft another one. Because looking at the current depth chart, well, there's not a lot of depth. It's Trevon Moehrig, it's Damani Richardson, and it's Nick Scott. Moehrig's going to start. Richardson right now, and I've been saying this pretty consistently, penciled in as a starter. We need to see who else they're bringing in and who they potentially draft to really know whether that's the guy that they have planned to be the other starting safety. Moehrig, 3 years, 51 mil. Yeah, he's starting. Damani Richardson, UDFA, started late last year. All the other guys were kind of shaky and free agents upcoming anyways. I wonder if that really is their plan. And then Nick Scott, well, he was one of those shaky guys, and we know he's here to go out there and tackle guys on special teams and, I mean, break glass and in case of emergency, play safety, which let's hope it doesn't come to that, but at least he has experience. Those are the only 3 that are on the roster right now at the safety position here in Carolina. And it does beg the question, how many safeties does Ejiro Evero want to actually play? He talked about last year during training camp that he looked at Xavier Woods, he looked at Jordan Fuller, and he looked at Nick Scott as a starting trio at safety. And once we got to the season, well, there's a lot of injuries, but this is kind of how things actually broke down. Not kind of, this is how things broke down. Xavier Woods played 1,200 snaps last year, while Jordan Fuller, Nick Scott, and Damani Richardson combined played 1,300 snaps. So they had one safety who started truly, and then there's a rotation of 3 guys, Fuller, Scott, and Richardson. Now, Fuller missed a ton of time because of injury. Scott missed a ton of time because of injury. And Richardson, well, was an undrafted free agent who was working his way into that position. And, well, he was impressive, made the team, all of that. And I thought he looked fairly good, graded out higher than those other guys mentioned last season as well in the snaps that he played. So that's how things played out. And you look at the year prior in 2023, the first year Ejiro Evero came to Carolina, it was Von Bell and Xavier Woods who both missed time due to injury, playing 700 snaps, while Alex Cook stepped in and Sam Franklin Jr. stepped in, and that was it. It was really, when healthy, Bell and Woods. And going back to his time in Denver, it was Justin Simmons and the other safety whose name I didn't write down, but still, it was two safeties. That's basically what it was. And typically in the NFL, the amount of snaps that you play, not a ton compared to college, of course, as it's not like an up-tempo game. You don't really rotate your safeties that much. Same thing with a linebacker. You're going to rotate on the defensive line. You might rotate some corners, and depending on what the packages are, obviously in the secondary and just defensively, maybe you're going to add another safety in there. But looking at the snap counts over the last 3 years, or all 3 years of Ejiro Evero actually being a defensive coordinator, rather, he only likes to play two guys. So if they do sign Blackmon, and they have Richardson, and then Scott, who's been in this system, but more of a backup, special teams kind of guy. I mean, are they going to be that interested in drafting someone? Maybe they are, but that does interest me just looking back at things. And again, they had been interested in Javon Holland, and there was talk about double dipping, and that may happen, may have happened, depending on when you're watching or listening to this show. But I'm guessing that if they sign a safety, it's going to be to a 1-year deal. And that would not preclude them from looking ahead to 2026 like they did last year and drafting another safety. Because if it is a 1-year deal, okay, Morgan's going to start this year and hopefully the next 2 years after that. And Blackmon could start this year and then go on his merry way. And Richardson then could step in and be the starter in 2026, or it could be whoever they draft. If they draft somebody earlier than you would expect them to draft a safety, if they do indeed go out there and sign or have signed one already. So we'll see. But if they do want to go draft a safety, who are some of the options out there? And when may the Carolina Panthers want to draft a safety upcoming here in April? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. So the Panthers may sign another veteran safety, and I do not think that'd be a bad idea at all. Trevon Moore clearly going to start after signing a 3-year, $51 million deal. Damani Richardson penciled in as a starter, and Nick Scott hoping not to see him out there playing actual defensive snaps this upcoming season. Special team snaps, play him as much to his heart's content, but do not need to see him out there on the field this upcoming season. And I do think it is valuable that he's back in Carolina, that he knows the system, that he has played as a starter before, has been a backup like he was last year. So if you need him to play, you know that he at least knows what he's doing. Now, is he going to show the capabilities that starter level in the NFL at this point in time? Probably not, but still, there is value to having on the roster, much like there was value to having Shai Tuttle, and could have been value had Miles Sanders, who apparently had some interesting things to say, but I read the quote, didn't really look like he was saying that much other than, I don't want to talk about my time in Carolina. Clearly didn't have a great time. He was brought here by Deuce and by Frank Reich, guys that he knew, and then things didn't work out as far as the groin, and then losing his job to Chuba. Frank gets fired after 11 games. Deuce gets fired as well. And then it's a brand new regime. And, well, yeah, it didn't really work out. So you can kind of understand how a guy who got fired, that's what happened. When you get cut, that's them firing you from your job. How often have you said bright things and positive things about a place that fired you? Probably not very often, even if it was just being laid off, being fired. Doesn't matter. People typically aren't happy when someone says, you can't work here anymore. So the whole Miles Sanders thing, whatever. But I thought there could be value in having him around, much like there's value in having Shai Tuttle and Nick Scott, and getting back to the point about safety. So bringing another one, whether it's Blackmon, whether it's, probably to a lesser extent, Williams, that to me does not preclude Carolina, with Richardson already here, Damani Richardson as a second-year player, from wanting to go out and draft the safety this upcoming draft coming up here in April up in Green Bay. And looking at just some of the options are out there and where they could take them. First round, I don't think they're taking a safety like at 8th overall. That, to me, that would be a bridge too far. Bridge is too far, probably. So no, at 57, it's possible based off of just the surprise that we saw last year. Didn't think they were going to be taking a running back in the second round, but they did at 46, and they traded back and then traded back up to get one in Jonathan Brooks. And obviously that's not panned out right now. And you look at 3rd round, 74th overall, maybe a 4th round when they're drafting at 111 and 114. That could be a sweet spot potentially for the Panthers if they're looking to draft one, just based off of, from my thoughts and what we've seen from some of the mock drafts, 8 appears to be an edge rusher. 57 appears to be a corner. 74, I haven't seen a 3-round mock. If there is one out there from a reputable mock draft person, please send it my way. I haven't been searching for 3-round mocks, to be quite honest with you. And maybe I'll go search one after the show. Probably not, but maybe. So I would think 74, 111, 114 in that range, that would probably be where they'd be trying to find one, as that can be a guy who could come in and play for you right away, potentially, or somebody who you would want to sit, maybe rotate him, and then in 2026 could be that guy. So looking at some that fit the bill between that little area of 74 to 114, Kevin Winston, Penn State. He is 84th overall on PFF's big board. He was the 10th highest graded safety back in 2023. And this is a little blurb they have on him. Winston's tape and athleticism that he showed off in 2023 made him a prospect worthy of going in the first round. While his recent injury muddies his projection, he's still one of the top safeties available if he can fully recover. So we're talking about a guy who apparently, based off his tape in 2023, looked like a first round safety. And that would go along with Xavier Watts. That would go along with Malachi Starks out of Georgia. And maybe Starks has kind of dropped off a little bit. I know Nick Eamon-Worry out of South Carolina. He's played himself now into the first round, it appears, after he had like a blazing speed on his combine or his pro day down there in Columbia, I believe it was a week ago, that had everybody saying, yeah, that's going to be a first rounder. And he was already great in the combine as well. And if you watch the games, he's a hell of a player, clearly. And weird stuff happened in that bowl game with Illinois, where he didn't even tell Shane Beamer that he was not playing in the second half. I mean, probably a better way to go about that. Guys want to opt out, whatever. But just say you're not going to play. Don't like just surprise and be like, nah, I'm good. So he's not going to be on the board for them. But Kevin Winston, that could be a guy who first round talent ends up dropping because of the injuries, and you're going to get a chance to look at him. Carolina could maybe bring him in for a top 30 visit. Maybe they already have, and they can look at the medicals, and that's what the combine's for. So we'll see. That's one guy. Lathan Ransom from the Ohio State University is off of a national championship. He's the 94th player on the PFF big board. Another blurb, it says toughness and tenacity are Ransom's calling cards. And, well, Carolina definitely looking for toughness, definitely looking for tenacity, which he makes good use of in all facets of the game. While he may lack the tools some other prospects have, he has the instincts and awareness to make up for it. He's not necessarily the most athletic and I don't know. I'm trying to find the right word. But yeah, I'm not gonna say it because I don't want to do it. But either way, it is not going to be like the archetype. That's what I'll say. He's not going to be the archetype of a safety you're looking for when you look at the build, like an Eamon-Worry is. But that's still a guy who could maybe fit into what they're trying to do here in Carolina. Right behind him at 95th on PFF's big board is Andrew Makuba, who was the 4th highest graded safety last year in his lone season at Texas, spent the beginning of his career at Clemson. And there's the whole Carolina's never drafted a player out of Clemson. Well, if they take Andrew Makuba, who I'm pretty sure has a degree from Clemson University. Maybe he doesn't, but spent way more time there than he did in Austin. Then no one can say that ever again, because he's a Clemson player far more than he'll ever be a Texas player. I don't care. You spent 4 years down in Clemson or 3 years. You're a Clemson Tiger. And yeah, you were a mercenary for a season in Austin, but come on. Makuba would fit the bill there. Looking at what PFF had to say about him, Makuba's lacking a run defense skill set may turn off some teams, and well, I don't like to hear that. But his instincts and athleticism and coverage make him a top prospect. His game is reminiscent of Devin McCourty, who excelled as a true free safety later in his career with the Patriots, but had the savviness to make plays from a variety of alignments because of his football intelligence. And you look at how things are right now, I would think that more of the guy who's going to be in the box stepping up and being that strong safety for you would be a guy like Trevon Moehrig. And so having someone like Makuba to come play free, that could make some sense, even if you're concerned maybe about that run defense skill. But if you're getting good tackling out of your other safety, JC, Mike Jackson, both those guys are willing tacklers, Shaw Smith-Wade as well in that slot, and then up front, they should be better against the run. That's not really what you're going to be asking Makuba to do moving forward, hopefully, even though he's got to get better at it. And that will be something they work on with him. Sebastian Castro out of Iowa, he's 24, so he's an older prospect. He was the 3rd best safety in 2023. And you look at what Iowa put out there, and Riley Moss, and also in Cooper DeJean, who had a pick 6 in the Super Bowl. they put out some pretty damn good defensive backs. That's been a great defense the last couple of years. So say what you want about Iowa and everything, the Iowa of it all, but they got some pretty good defensive backs, and Sebastian Castro is another one of them. Jonas Sanker from Virginia, 114th. Virginia has been terrible, but he's actually been one of the lone bright spots there in Charlottesville since Tony Elliott took over. And of course, there's been some tough things that have happened in that program. That's the guy to look at. And then Billy Bowman from Oklahoma. He's 149. Now, OU had a great defense last year. Like Brent Venables, the defense that he's built there is spectacular. The problem with them was obviously the offense, but that defense, you watch the Alabama game, they won that game because of what the defense was able to do and how they were able to get after a quarterback in Jalen Milroe, who I don't really know what Milroe's draft status is going to be. He's going to be drafted. I don't really know how teams feel about him as a quarterback, but you saw Bowman in that Oklahoma defense get after him. The little quick thing that PFF has to say about him, whoever drafts Bowman will have to live with his tackling woes. If you can get over that, you can get a versatile coverage defender who's a big play machine. So I look at anybody off of the OU defense and I know they can play. So kind of like the Ohio State, like Ransom, you know, he can play. So those are some guys I'm looking at that could make sense from that 74th overall to 114, maybe even wait until the 5th round at 140 range for Carolina, but more into that 111, 114 if they're looking still to get a safety, even if they go out there and sign one or already have signed one, depending upon what has happened and when this has come out. So those are my thoughts on what could happen if Carolina does sign a veteran safety here over the coming days and weeks heading into the 2025 NFL draft. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Fridays, I'm over here on the offseason answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Either at me or DM me on Twitter or at me on Blue Sky to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.